When a wealthy woman at an upscale restaurant decided to humiliate a young black waiter by forcing him to play the grand piano for her amusement, she thought it would be an entertaining joke. But what happened next left the entire room frozen. In shock, as his fingers touched the keys, the room filled with a melody so powerful and beautiful that even the cruel woman's smug smile disappeared. By the time he finished, no one could believe what they had just witnessed. The evening sun cast a golden hue over the prestigious Linden Grove, a five-star restaurant nestled in the heart of New York City. The walls were adorned with elegant art pieces, and a soft hum of polite conversation filled the air, accompanied by the faint clinking of silverware. The grand piano in the corner of the room sat untouched, a mere decoration for the elite diners who frequented the establishment. Marcus, a young black man in his mid-20s, moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease. His crisp white shirt and black vest were immaculately pressed, but his eyes held a quiet weariness from long hours on his feet. Marcus worked hard to support his family, saving every tip to help his younger sister through college. What his customers did not know, however, was that beneath his calm exterior lay a passion and talent that few had ever witnessed. At a corner table, Clarissa Davenport, a woman in her late 40s, draped in designer clothes and dripping with expensive jewelry, sat with a group of equally wealthy friends. Her sharp eyes flicked around the room, seeking entertainment, her lips curling into a sly smile when they landed on Marcus. "Waiter!" she called out, her voice cutting through the gentle ambience like a knife. Marcus approached her table politely, offering a courteous nod. "Yes, ma'am. How can I assist you?" he asked, his tone professional. Clarissa's smile widened. "You've been serving us all evening, but I think it's time you really entertained us," she drawled, gesturing toward the grand piano. "Why don't you play us a tune? Surely you know how, don't you?" Her friends chuckled, their laughter laced with condescension. Marcus hesitated, feeling the weight of every eye in the room turning toward him. He knew what this was, a public humiliation. But instead of showing discomfort, he gave a small, polite smile. "As you wish, ma'am," he replied calmly, setting down his tray and walking toward the piano. The room fell silent, diners curious to see how the situation would unfold. Clarissa leaned back in her chair, confident this would be the highlight of her evening. Marcus sat on the polished piano bench, his fingers hovering over the keys for a brief moment. Then, with a deep breath, he began to play. The first notes floated into the air, soft and melodic, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. His fingers danced effortlessly across the keys, weaving a complex, soulful tune that resonated through the space. The music was rich with emotion, blending classical precision with jazz improvisation. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the waitstaff froze, their eyes locked on Marcus as he poured his heart into every note. Clarissa's smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion, then disbelief. This was not the awkward, stumbling performance she had expected. The room seemed to breathe in unison with the music, each note pulling the listeners deeper into Marcus's world. His talent was undeniable, his skill extraordinary. As the final chord echoed through the restaurant, the silence that followed was almost deafening. Then, as if breaking from a trance, the room erupted into applause. Diners stood from their seats, clapping and cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. Marcus gave a modest nod, his face calm, but his eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Clarissa sat frozen in her chair, her face pale, her earlier arrogance shattered. She tried to regain her composure, but the damage was done. Her attempt to belittle Marcus had backfired spectacularly, leaving her exposed as nothing more than a petty bully. As Marcus returned to his duties, patrons stopped him to offer praise, some even slipping generous tips into his hand. The restaurant's manager approached him later that evening, offering him a permanent position as the in-house pianist on weekends. Clarissa and her friends left in silence, their laughter long gone. But for Marcus, the night marked a turning point. No longer just a waiter in the eyes of those who frequented Linden Grove, he had proven that true talent and dignity could outshine even the deepest cruelty. And as he walked home that night, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, Marcus knew he had not just played a song, he had played a victory. The murmurs in the lavish dining hall grew louder as Eleanor's sharp voice sliced through the ambient music. "Come on now," she sneered, waving her diamond-encrusted hand toward Marcus, the young black waiter who had been quietly refilling glasses. "Surely you know how to do something entertaining, don't you?" Her eyes glinted with malice, and the room chuckled along with her, the wealthy guests emboldened by her cruelty. Marcus froze for a moment, his fingers tightening around the water pitcher. He had heard whispers about Eleanor's reputation, the kind of woman who thrived on belittling others, especially those she deemed beneath her. But tonight, the humiliation was personal. She wasn't just mocking his uniform or his position, she was reaching deep, trying to diminish his dignity in front of strangers. "Why don't you play us something on the piano?" she continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's right there. Or is that too much to ask?" A hush fell over the room, all eyes now pinned on Marcus. The gleaming grand piano stood in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the glittering chandelier lights. The guests leaned in, anticipating a spectacle. Whether it would be a clumsy attempt at music or a flustered refusal, they were ready to laugh at his expense. Marcus felt the heat rising in his cheeks. He could refuse, but he knew what would follow. Whispers behind his back, sneering comments about how he couldn't even muster the courage to touch the keys. His manager, standing nervously at the side, gave him a helpless look, silently urging him to comply and avoid further trouble. With a calm he didn't entirely feel, Marcus set the pitcher down on a nearby table. "Of course, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The guests chuckled, nudging each other as they anticipated the upcoming embarrassment. He walked slowly toward the piano, feeling the weight of every gaze on his back. His worn shoes made soft thuds against the marble floor, each step echoing in the suddenly silent room. When he reached the bench, he paused, his reflection staring back at him from the glossy black surface of the piano. He took a deep breath, trying to center himself. Behind him, Eleanor's voice rang out again, loud and taunting. "Do not be shy now, we are all friends here." More laughter followed, but Marcus didn't turn around. Instead, he gently lifted the piano lid, revealing the pristine keys beneath. His fingers hovered above them, memories rushing back, long hours spent practicing on a battered old keyboard in his grandmother's tiny apartment, the feel of music flowing through him, offering an escape from the struggles of daily life. He let his fingers press down gently on the keys, the first notes soft and tentative. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd at the hesitant start, but Marcus didn't flinch. He let the music guide him, his hands moving with growing confidence. The laughter began to fade, replaced by curious murmurs as the simple melody deepened into something richer, more intricate. The room grew still. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Marcus's hands danced across the keys, weaving a complex tapestry of sound that filled every corner of the grand hall. The music swelled, each note dripping with emotion, pain, hope, resilience. The very walls seemed to vibrate with the beauty of his performance. Eleanor's smug expression faltered, her eyes narrowing as she tried to process what was happening. This wasn't the clumsy fumbling she had expected. No, Marcus was transforming the atmosphere, commanding the attention of every person in the room. The same people who had laughed at him moments before were now sitting in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties, gathering quietly at the edges of the room to witness Marcus's performance. Some exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from surprise to pride. They knew Marcus as the quiet, diligent worker, but none had seen this side of him, this raw, unfiltered talent that left even the most privileged speechless. The final notes of the piece lingered in the air, hanging like a delicate thread. When Marcus finally lifted his fingers from the keys, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer, as if no one dared to disturb the magic he had just created. Then, as if on cue, the entire hall erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite clapping of a bored audience. It was genuine, heartfelt appreciation. The guests who had moments ago reveled in Eleanor's mockery were now on their feet, their faces flushed with awe and admiration. But Marcus didn't bask in the applause. He stood up quietly, closing the piano lid with care. Without a word, he turned and began walking back toward his post, his expression calm, his dignity intact. The guests parted for him, their previous arrogance replaced with respect. Some even reached out to shake his hand or offer compliments, but Marcus moved past them with quiet grace. Eleanor sat frozen in her chair, her face pale and eyes wide. The same woman who had orchestrated his humiliation now found herself the object of whispered jokes and sideways glances. The power she had wielded so confidently had slipped through her fingers, leaving her exposed and embarrassed in front of the very people she had tried to impress. As Marcus resumed his duties, the applause finally began to fade. But the energy in the room had shifted irreversibly. The guests who had once dismissed him as just a waiter now saw him for who he truly was, a man of incredible talent and unshakable resilience. And in that moment, Marcus knew he had done more than just play the piano. He had reclaimed his dignity, silenced his detractors, and reminded everyone in that grand hall that true worth could never be measured by wealth or status. As the room buzzed with quiet murmurs and stifled laughter, the black waiter approached the grand piano, his steps measured and calm. The rich woman, still basking in her arrogance, leaned back in her chair with a smug smile, certain this would be the highlight of her evening. The other guests, drawn by the commotion, gathered around, expecting a spectacle of mockery. The waiter, whose name was Marcus, adjusted the stool and placed his fingers gently on the keys. For a brief moment, the room held its breath, the anticipation thick with condescension. Then, the first notes rang out. Soft, delicate, and hauntingly beautiful. The melody floated through the air, silencing the crowd instantly. Marcus's fingers danced across the keys with effortless grace, weaving a rich, complex composition that resonated in every corner of the upscale restaurant. The patrons, who moments ago chuckled at his supposed misfortune, now stood frozen, their eyes wide and jaws slack. Each note seemed to tell a story of struggle, resilience, and a passion honed over years of dedication. The rich woman's smirk faded, replaced by a furrowed brow and tight lips. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face flushing a deep crimson as the realization dawned. Her attempt at humiliation had spectacularly backfired. The very man she sought to belittle now commanded the room with undeniable talent and presence. As Marcus transitioned into a soaring crescendo, the emotion in his music swelled. Some of the guests found themselves moved to tears, their hearts touched by the raw, unfiltered beauty pouring from the piano. The atmosphere shifted from one of mockery to one of profound respect. The once boisterous dining room was now a cathedral of reverence, each listener captivated by the unexpected brilliance before them. When the final note lingered in the air and gently faded, there was a moment of stunned silence before the room erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, heartfelt, and entirely genuine. Patrons stood from their tables, clapping vigorously, some even whistling and cheering. The rich woman sat motionless, her face pale, as the weight of her humiliation settled in. The crowd's attention had shifted entirely from her to Marcus, the waiter she had tried to disgrace, but who had instead left everyone speechless with his undeniable gift. Marcus stood, offering a humble nod to the audience before quietly stepping away from the piano. But in the hearts and minds of everyone in that restaurant, his performance and the powerful message it carried would not be forgotten. As Marcus stepped away from the piano, the applause still echoing in the grand hall, the restaurant's manager, Mr. Callahan, pushed through the crowd. His face was a mixture of awe and embarrassment, realizing he had employed a musical prodigy without ever knowing it. "Marcus!" he called out, his voice shaky but sincere. I had no idea." The manager extended his hand, but Marcus, ever composed, simply nodded with a polite smile. He had long accepted that people often saw only what they wanted to see. Before anyone could say more, an elderly gentleman near the bar, dressed in a sharp suit with an unmistakable air of importance, approached. He introduced himself as Mr. Hollingsworth, a renowned music producer with decades of experience discovering hidden talents. "Young man," he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement, "that was the most moving performance I've heard in years. You have a gift, one that the world needs to hear." The rich woman, still seated, her face a portrait of humiliation and disbelief, watched as the crowd that once shared her mocking laughter now surrounded Marcus, offering compliments and opportunities. Her attempt to belittle him had only revealed her own ignorance and cruelty. She tried to regain control of the moment, forcing a strained smile as she stood and approached Marcus. "That was quite impressive," she stammered, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Perhaps I misjudged you." Marcus turned to her, his gaze steady and calm. "It's not about your judgment," he replied softly, "but about seeing people for who they truly are, beyond what you expect them to be." Her face flushed deeper, and without another word, she turned on her heel and hurried out of the restaurant, her departure unnoticed by most, as all eyes remained on Marcus. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their meals, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations buzzed with excitement about Marcus's talent, and many diners approached him with offers, encouragement, and heartfelt thanks for the unexpected gift of his music. Later that evening, as the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed, Marcus sat alone at the piano once more. The keys beneath his fingers felt familiar, comforting, but tonight they also felt like the beginning of something new. His music had broken barriers and changed perceptions, not just for the people in that room, but for himself. When he finally stood to leave, he did so with a quiet confidence. He knew his life had changed, not because of the rich woman's mockery, but because of the power of his own resilience and talent. As the final notes of Marcus's piano performance lingered in the air, a profound silence filled the room, a silence not born from discomfort but from sheer awe. The rich woman who had tried to belittle him now sat frozen, her face pale with shock and humiliation. The guests who had initially snickered at her cruel command were now exchanging glances, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and admiration. Marcus quietly stood from the piano bench, his posture calm, his face composed. He did not need to say a word. His music had spoken volumes, shattering the prejudices that had hung heavy in the room just moments before. As he began to walk away, the room erupted into applause, not the polite, forced kind, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. The same people who had silently judged him now recognized his undeniable talent, and with it, his dignity. Mr. Dalton approached Marcus, his eyes glistening with a mix of pride and regret. "I had no idea," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have treated you with the respect you deserved from the start." Marcus gave a small nod, accepting the apology, but knowing that true change would only come through reflection and growth. Later that evening, As Marcus returned home, he sat quietly at his modest piano, the same one he had practiced on for years. His fingers hovered over the keys, but instead of playing, he reflected on the day's events. It wasn't just about proving his talent. It was about standing firm in the face of cruelty, about letting his art speak where words could not. He realized that no matter where life took him, his worth was not defined by the judgments of others, but by the passion and resilience within his heart. The next morning, the story of the waiter who left a room full of elites speechless spread throughout the town. But for Marcus, it wasn't about the fame or the recognition. It was a reminder that dignity could not be stolen, that true strength lies in grace under pressure, and that sometimes the most powerful response to hate is to shine even brighter. In the end, Marcus's music didn't just entertain, it transformed. It reminded everyone who heard it that talent, dignity, and humanity transcend wealth and prejudice. And as he played his piano each night, he carried with him the lesson that in a world quick to judge, staying true to oneself is the greatest victory of all.